Well, let's bring in my first guest. I'm honored to have with us tonight former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who has written a brilliant editorial in today's Daily Telegraph, all about the expected referendum on an Aboriginal voice to Parliament, which could take place as soon as next year. In it, he writes, "Goodwill towards Aboriginal people has never been greater, and there is all but universal support for recognising Indigenous people in the Constitution. But this proposal for a constitutionally entrenched Indigenous voice to the government and to the Parliament is way beyond recognition. It's a special body for some, but not all, based on how long your ancestors have been in Australia." Is that really what we want in our Constitution? Two classes of Australians based on race? That's why the coming referendum is almost sure to be the most important issue our country faces next year, and why it deserves far more debate in detail than it's had so far. Tony, thank you so much again for joining us. Now, I think you've hit on something really, really important here. I mean, I've been an Australian citizen for 15 years now, and it disturbs me that the promise of that citizenship, that I have the exact same rights to representation as the descendants of, say, a First Fleet convict, or a second-generation Vietnamese migrant, or an Aboriginal Australian whose ancestors have been here for tens of thousands of years, could be weakened. Is that what you see going on here with The Voice?
Well, that's exactly right, James. I think this would be wrong in principle as well as bad in practice. In Western countries, we've spent hundreds of years, millennia even, trying to get to a situation where we do not discriminate on the basis of race, colour, creed, gender, etc., where everyone, be they slave or free, Gentile or Jew, male or female, is as one. That's what we've been trying to do. And I worry very, very much indeed that we are breaching this fundamental principle, a principle that we've worked so hard to enshrine and succeeded in recent decades in adhering to. I'm very worried that out of an abundance of goodwill, Australians might end up doing something deeply counterproductive, which they then find almost impossible to reverse because it's entrenched in the Constitution. And that's why I'm speaking out, and that's why other good people, in particular people like Jacinta Price, the wonderfully courageous Indigenous senator from the Northern Territory, that's why we're speaking out to alert people to the potential danger of this change.
But Tony, you know, you do see some voices, and I think a lot of them are self-interested, some lawyers and so on, who say that the whole thing has been stress-tested and that this will not cause any damage to the Constitution. I mean, are they just running kind of a self-interested argument to try and allay fears and get this over the line?
Look, the easiest thing in the world is to say, oh, look, it's no big deal, just wave it through. But this is a very big deal indeed. Anything that involves changing our Constitution is for keeps in a way that something that Parliament does is not. That's why it needs the closest and the deepest possible examination before people actually vote upon it. This idea that, oh look, to oppose The Voice is being disrespectful to Indigenous people, not true. Someone like Jacinta Price, someone like Warren Mundine, a former National President of the Labor Party, would not be speaking out against this voice if to say no to The Voice would somehow be disrespectful to their own people. This voice, as I said, I think it's wrong in principle. I think it would be bad in practice. And when it comes to stress testing all of this, the nearest thing that we've had to a voice was ATSIC, which some of your viewers might remember, James.
Yes.
ATSIC was abolished in the early 2000s by the Howard government with support from the Labor Party because it had become completely dysfunctional and corrupt. And that's the nearest thing that we've had to a voice in the past. And that's one of the many reasons why we should be very, very careful about entrenching this voice in our Constitution.
Well, that's a great point, but I think you make another fantastic point in your piece, and it is that it is ironic that the same government that is pushing the voice also ignored the voices of many Aboriginal Australians when it came to axing the cashless debit card. I mean, they can't have it both ways, can they?
Well, exactly right. There's never been more goodwill to Indigenous people, and I think there's all but universal support for recognising Indigenous people in our nation's founding document, the Constitution. But this goes way beyond recognition. This is essentially co-governance. Now, there's a lot of talk, including from the Prime Minister today, that the voice will make it easier to deal with the issues that Indigenous people face in their daily lives, particularly in remote Australia. Wrong, wrong, wrong. This voice is going to make it harder, not easier, to deal with the problems of remote Indigenous communities. Almost inevitably, it's going to be dominated by inner city activists. The inner city activists that the Albanese government listened to on the cashless debit card instead of, and the alcohol bans, instead of the people living in remote Australia who are only too conscious of the fact that giving people free cash was creating the rivers of grog, which makes it so difficult to get the kids to school, get the adults to work, and to keep communities safe. So the paradox of all of this is that the people who want yet another Indigenous voice in Canberra are precisely the people who don't want to listen to the real life voices of Indigenous people in remote Australia who said, please, let's keep the cashless debit card, and please, let's keep the alcohol bans.
Well, I mean, speaking of the inner city, it doesn't get more inner city than this. Today I saw, just before we came to air, the Australian Institute of Corporate Directors said they're going to back in the voice. Albo has said he's not going to fund a yes or a no case, but I'm hearing that an awful lot of big corporates are going to wind up pushing for this as part of their reconciliation action plans. Are you concerned that corporate Australia is going to mount a campaign to foist this on people essentially by stealth?
I am very concerned. I am very, very concerned that by refusing to fund both sides of the argument, by refusing even to circulate the traditional pamphlet from both sides of the argument that's previously accompanied every referendum, that this government will not play fair. So on the one hand, you'll have woke billionaires and woke public company management trying to coerce their staff, trying to coerce the public into supporting something which hasn't been properly thought through, hasn't been explained in detail, will make an enormous difference to the way our country is governed over time, and will make what in many cases are already bad situations worse. If this voice, which is not a voice for all of us, it's just a voice for some of us, if this voice goes to the people, my fear is that without a people's campaign against it, given the establishment voices that are going to be for it, it's going to be a very one-sided debate, and I don't think that's fair, and that's why I think it's so important that people speak out now, and that's why I'm so proud of that very brave Indigenous woman who very much has her feet on the ground in remote Australia. Jacinta Price has been prepared to start this campaign.